Welcome back to Perkins Pipes. Beautiful day here, although this is going to be the Halloween video, and for that I brought out this beautiful little black Savinelli King's Cross Featherweight pipe. I really do enjoy this very small, petite little pipe. Enjoy this very much, but black seemed to be the order of the day, especially for what we're going to talk about, which is a book that for me goes back over 40 years. My friends, as always, let's get this guy lit. Let's get to talking. I recently reread a book that I read multiple times, but hadn't read in over 40 years. What in the world are we talking about? When I was in elementary school, I especially remember this in 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, which for me and the time where I grew up, and the place where I grew up, elementary school was kindergarten through 6th grade. I remember our 4th grade teacher, Mr. Dewey, my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Lang, and my 6th grade teacher, Mr. Goldstein, would all read a book to us, usually after lunch, as I recall, kind of, chapter a day until you got through it. And many of those I remember to this day. Some of those I read to my children as they were younger and around that age. And one of my all-time favorites, one I always wanted to own, and for some reason I feel I may have had a paperback of it at one time. Would love to purchase it again. I've seen it on eBay, and I think I could find it. It was called The Witch's Bridge by Barbie Oliver Carleton. Always remembered that name. Came out in 1967 was when it was published, and the version I knew that our teacher read to us, and that I then checked out of our library, and I must have read multiple times, was a kind of a blue hardback, and it was called The Witch's Bridge. Later, the title got changed to Mystery of the Witch's Bridge, and was a paperback. That one captured a place in my heart. And now this is a young boy, so what are you in 5th grade about? Around 11 years old or so. And it was about a boy who I think was around 13, named Dan Pride. And he had been sent to live with his uncle, Julian Pride. His parents had both passed away. There was an accident or something. Sent to live with his uncle. Uncle unmarried, had no children. Lived on an island called Pride's Point, out in this marshy area in Massachusetts. And right away, he arrives at night, and a hired hand from the place picks him up, a fellow named Billy Ben. Billy Ben Corey picks him up at the train station and takes him to the big house. And it's dark, and already there's a sense of foreboding. And they go across this bridge in the marsh and then out to the area of Pride's Point. He meets his uncle, and his uncle is not mean, but not exactly warm, not exactly friendly. And so right away, it's this boy in a lonely situation. Very quickly, he develops a couple of friends. They are twins, fraternal twins, Pip and Gilly. Pip and Gilly. Pip being short for Philip. And he meets them, and they kind of start to play and have connections, and that's really great. He does some work around the place in the summertime when he goes, and this Billy Ben is the hired hand, works the place, and his aunt is the housekeeper, and she makes the food and all this kind of stuff for him. Billy Ben gets him to do various projects around the place and makes him feel a little bit like a man, you know, being able to do real work. And then slowly things begin to unfold, that there is a mystery, and it turns out that one of Dan's ancestors had been involved in a deal to purchase some land from a nearby family called the Bishops. And on the night of the sale, something happened. Dan was murdered. The Pride family believed that the Bishops were behind it all. And along with this, there had been a rumor that some of the early Prides had been witches and had been, I think, driven out of town. And so there was kind of a curse on the Pride family name. People didn't trust the Prides. And here this Pride had been murdered. And then the Prides hated the Bishops because of this. And, well, young Dan gets kind of caught up in this. He wants to find out more about what's going on and everything. Wants to explore. Comes to find out that his new friends, Pip and Gilly, are actually descendants of the Bishops. And his uncle then forbids him to see them again. And so there's conflict there. And Dan then becomes almost obsessed with finding out the secret. What happened to his ancestor who had been murdered, ultimately proving that the Bishops didn't do it and that his friend's family is not guilty. And lots of twists and turns. People that you thought were good in the book initially turn out to be bad. The whole thing gets resolved, of course, at the end, and Dan has a good relationship then with his uncle at the end. There's a dog who's been unfortunately abused and seems mean, but Dan befriends the dog. His name is Caliban, and he's this black dog and scares a lot of people, but Dan befriends him, and the dog then loves Dan. So, recently, I reread that. It's on Archive, the Archive website, so I read it online, archive.com. And you say, why in the world, here you are, a grown man, you talk about literature all the time, Latin and Greek and literature of Alexander Pope and people like this. Why were you reading a young adult book? Well, first of all, good stories are good stories. And I don't care if it's where there's 2 words on a page and it's a little child's book and it's got thick cardboard pages. A good story is a good story. All right, I'm not enough of so much of a literature snob that I'm not going to appreciate a good story. And The Witch's Bridge is a good story. It's well told. I wanted to go back to my past. That was part of it. I just wanted to revisit a memory, a beloved childhood memory. I just loved this book so much back in the day. What was interesting to me, though, was how much I didn't remember and the things that I did. So as I'm reading page after page of this, suddenly I remember, oh yeah, I remember those characters, Pip and Gilly. Yeah, I forgot about it. Oh yeah, I remember Billy Ben. There was a scene where he gets Dan to do some trimming out around the property. And Dan is at it really hard with the shears, right? You work with your hand shears. And actually rubbed his hand raw. And I think Mrs. Corey, the housekeeper, had to put something on it. I remembered that. I remembered that scene. I remembered stuff about Caliban the dog, and as it was going along, I was like, wait a minute. I think Dan and the dog become friends. And sure enough, that happened. I seem to remember something vaguely about the reconciliation of Dan and his uncle in a very dramatic, which I'm not going to tell you. You should go out and read the book. But in a very dramatic moment in the story, something happens, and Dan and his uncle definitely come together and are very much reconciled. I knew that was coming up. I couldn't remember how it went down, but I knew it was coming up. The stuff about the bridge itself, and there was stuff involving going under the water and around the bridge in a secret passageway and so forth. I remembered some of that, so I kind of knew some of that where it was going, but I couldn't remember the details. His uncle at one point, Billy Ben, I think, had found an old skiff and told Dan, hey, you and your friends can paint this and use it to kind of sail around the marsh. I remembered that. As they ended up naming it the Jinx. And I kind of remembered that, so there were parts of that. And then there was a line that when I saw it, I was like, oh, I remember the exact line. The groundsman, Billy Ben, turns out to be a bad guy. At one point, he's threatening Dan. And he throws Dan's family's past back at him, the fact that some of them have been accused of witches. And he says, you know, Dan, it says in the Bible, thou shalt not suffer a witch to live. Now, I will tell you, in 5th grade, I was no Bible scholar. But I remembered that line and like, ooh, there's a line from the Bible in this book. And I'm like, ooh, that's kind of interesting, kind of neat. And I think I went and looked it up in the Bible. And when I saw that line here recently in the book, I was like, yes, I remember that. I remember that moment. And the whole thing was just a wonderful, wonderful reread after over 40 years. So, the first question, my hunch is no, but boy, if there's somebody out there for whom the answer is yes, I would love to hear from you. Does anybody know that book, The Witch's Bridge, or Mystery of the Witch's Bridge, by Barbie Oliver Carleton? Barbee is her name. Do you know that book? Second of all, and perhaps more importantly, do you remember fondly books from your childhood? And I think I've talked about this before on this channel. Do you remember books fondly from your childhood? If so, what are those books? And then, have you ever gone back and reread books from your childhood, not to your own children, not to nieces, nephews, or grandchildren, but just for your own pleasure? Have you ever gone back and reread childhood books? Like I say, I think a good story is a good story. And if it's a young adult novel, so be it. Folks, as Malcolm Guite likes to say, I do these little things in order at last to do nothing. Or so I like to say in Latin, Parva ago ut tandem, nihil agam. Have a wonderful day.